So hello, this is Supriya and I'm back with another process video. In this video I'll show you some work that I made after being inspired by the Nepalese Seasons Rain and Ritual exhibit at the Rubin Museum. So here are some work samples. This I found very interesting because this is a merman. Here's some museum text for you to pause and read up on. I've only ever seen mermaids and serpent mermaids in South Asian art, so this is very interesting. And here, this is a very cringe-inducing old work, which, as you can see, was made in 2004. And apparently I had named this mysterious.jpg. So I'm guessing I had something going on in my mind when I was thinking about this visual. So, what I was aiming for was to recreate my old work, but also take some inspiration from the artwork I saw at the museum. Alright, so here we begin. Now, I originally had not been thinking about screencasting this, so unfortunately, this is where the video begins. As you can see, I have a drawing, I have put it on multiply mode, and I am blocking in the colors. And for color blocking, I choose to use a lot of the lasso tool, and I just fill in. Then I move on to manual painting with the brush. I use opacity and flow settings adjusted to pressure. And then I start working up the dimensions and adding details. That way I can have a better idea of the color scheme before I jump into all the tiny details. Eventually I move on to working on the facial features. Now I did end up changing this a lot. Originally I had thought I would make a very human looking face. I decided to go against that, but I'll be talking more about that later. I was having some problems drawing, painting over her nose, but anyway, figured that out eventually. So I do a lot of back and forth, zooming out and in. And notice how when I add different tones of light, it's not just a lighter version with more white mixed in, but it's also a slightly different hue. And I think that kind of thing adds richness to the painting scheme, the color scheme of work. So as you can see, I have moved on to a much smaller brush size, working on the neck, and you saw how convenient it is to use a brush with opacity and flow settings on pressure, testing out different brushes. So as I was painting this, I was also thinking about the design of it all. I figured since this was an aquatic looking scene, the mermaid should have gills on her face, something like that. She has gills on her neck right now as well, but eventually I removed them. This is the point where I finally figured out how the nose was supposed to be painted. Okay, so I covered up the gills because I didn't like them. Still figuring things out, moving back and forth, up and down. Okay, now, here is the slightly more interesting part. This is where I decided to add some scales for a more fish-like, fishy appearance. What I did was I chose one of the textured brushes. Apparently Krita already has the scale textured brush, and I used that to brush it on to places I wanted it to be most visible. So I'm just changing the settings for a smaller size texture, and right now it is a horrid Pepto-Bismol pink, just so that I can see where I'm painting. As you can see, it's towards the edges of the original larger texture. Lock the transparency on those layers. They're on two different layers. I lock the transparency on them, and then I start overpainting. Now, unfortunately, I forgot to take a video of the middle portion, but here is a part from another clip, and you can see what I did with the opacity settings. Like, only certain parts of it are most prominent, everything else is blended in, and that creates this shimmering sort of feel. I keep my references handy, go back and forth to check back on how the crown was supposed to be drawn. So now I'm building up more forms, moving on to the hair and the rest of the head. Adding more color, shaping it as I go. I didn't really have a strong drawing of this, so I'm just guesstimating it. And notice how some of the lines from the underdrawing are still showing through? Well, I don't always go to the trouble of cleaning them all up. Sometimes I like it if it has a certain kind of roughness in certain portions. So this is how I'm drawing some of the like brocade, I'm not sure what it's called, parts around her collar. I had a darker base color and then I used a mid-toned ochre to just draw in the design forms. I am building up the hair some more. I'm adding some highlights to the hair to give it more dimension, shinier. Just put in some background mermaids, or suggest them. Okay, so at this point, I decided against having a human face. Why? Well, I thought it was boring, conceptually. And also it felt very cliche, like your typical mermaid image, and everybody likes drawing mermaids, and it's gonna be the same, so I wanted this to be different. It makes sense for her to be something a bit more fish-like, so why not make her eyes like that as well? Changing the structure of the gills to extend all the way to the lips now. Okay, so did have to search for some references because I was getting confused about what a fish eye was supposed to look like. Okay, so you have a closer look at that. I had to make adjustments. I'm not sure what just happened. I think I just turned on or off different layer settings. Okay, so I needed a more close-up reference view. And notice how instead of white, I've used some of the lighter blue aqua tints to use as the highlight on the eyes. Putting some color to her gills. The red was a little bit way too overdone, so toning that down again. And I also decided to enhance some of the ambient lighting that is hitting the front of her face. Not the strong light from the back, but the more softer ambient light. To suggest the murkiness of the water, I make sure to spray paint some parts of the background mermaids. And when I do that, I think about the dimension of those forms. The furthest arm would be the dimmest, the closest parts would be the darkest, the most high contrast silhouette. So I think about that as I am painting over with the same color as the water. And I'm just taking a smaller brush to refine that a bit more. So I apply some finishing touches on the hair. At this point I feel a need to enhance the backlight some more. And I add some of the thinnest, of the finer details of the hair. I'm just going over all the backlit areas a bit more. Adding some overlap so that we know she's in front and the background mermaid is in the background. With the thinnest strands. What I do is I just make a blank layer. I put in the thin lines and I give them dimension by coloring certain portions of them differently, like you see over here. So line and then color with a different tone. Lock the transparency before you do that, of course. I honestly don't know where these extra fins are coming from, somewhere on the back of her head, so yeah. So here I'm adding her ears in because she looked very incomplete without them. I use a brush with the increased saturation option on to enhance some of the places where I expect subsurface scattering to take place. I do some final touch-ups, adjusting the contrast and brightness, and eventually I do feel like it has something missing still. So to bring the whole thing into focus, I decide to add some foreground elements with some aquatic plants. So I just draw the forms and then apply a Gaussian blur on them. I had to redo that front one quite a few times because I just wasn't very happy with the composition of it. Okay, so that one really had to be done a few times. Okay. So, here we have the final image. Put my signature in there. Now, I had set out to improve on an old work of mine and also reference the work at the museum and also retain that sense of mystery that I had originally wanted to convey with my early 2004 drawing. Alright, so this part of the audio is going to sound weird because I'm using a different microphone setting. But anyway, I'm usually not sure what to say at the end of the video. I hope that this video was useful for you. If you want to see more of my work, check out the links below. And also the rest of my channel for the other videos that I've made. See you next time.